With me are Conservative MP Bernard Jenkin, Jason Hunter, who says he's quit his job to fight Brexit, Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine, and the writer and campaigner Maya Goodfellow. Today, is everyone clear what's happening with Brexit?
What has now emerged is the idea that an option to extend the implementation period could be a further solution to this issue of the backstop in Northern Ireland.
What's up, buddy?
Do you still support the Chequers deal?
This Conservative MP's found his voice and says he might not even vote Tory. And should the law be changed to help people like this?
I would feel a bit upset if I wasn't included in a women's space because I don't identify as anything else.
Bernard, are there any circumstances in which you would consider not voting Conservative?
Well, you know, in your darkest moments, that's the sort of thought that crosses your mind and you wonder sometimes whether you're in the right party. I'm sure everybody's had that thought.
Have you had those thoughts?
But not recently. I think I was born into the Conservative Party. My father was a Conservative politician. My wife's a Conservative politician. Her grandfather and her grandmother were Conservative politicians.
I think you've justified a long thread there.
I kind of think I'm going to die as a Conservative, almost whatever happens.
Well, let's not talk about that prematurely. Now, let's have a look at what the Tory MP, Johnny Mercer, actually said in his interview with the House magazine. He said, when you go home from here on a Thursday and go for a run across Dartmoor or whatever, and you're stripped to your core being, I mean, yeah, you realise it's a, and here he uses some colourful language, we'll call it poor show, just for today's programme. There's no doubt about it that my set of values and ethos, I was comfortable that it was aligned with the Conservative Party. I'm not as comfortable that's the case anymore. If the situation was like it is now, I can safely say there would be absolutely no chance that I would try and be a Member of Parliament. And asked if he would vote for the Conservatives, he said, I wouldn't go and vote. Let's talk to Seb Whale, who did that interview with Johnny Mercer. What's he so cross about, Seb?
I think he's very cross about the direction of travel of the party under Theresa May, which he sees is fundamentally different to the party that he joined under David Cameron and George Osborne. And I think he's finally reaching the end of his tether and he's come out swinging because if he doesn't, then he might be forced to make a decision he doesn't want to make.
Now, we've been trying to get hold of Johnny Mercer, as no doubt has everybody. We've had no luck so far. Has he gone to ground?
I think he might be hunkering down a little bit, yes. I think he's articulated what he needed to articulate and now he's going to withdraw and let it sink in. But, you know, I think sometimes with politicians, they say things that they perhaps regret. I think Johnny knew what he was saying and he said it with, you know, authority and he'd obviously been thinking about it for a long time. Yes,
I mean, he also says in that interview that he'd love to be Defence Secretary. I mean, is it a sort of contradictory position that he's holding here? Well,
I think he is ultimately, he is committed to the cause, but he thinks that the party has moved away from what he believes in. So he does want to serve. He's sort of chomping at the bit. He's like a 5'10" bundle of energy that's just ready to explode. And he doesn't feel like he's being utilised. So I think he's ready to serve, but only if it's the right government. And he told me he wouldn't serve in this administration.
Seb, thank you very much. Sarah, do you have some sympathy for Johnny Mercer and how he's feeling?
I suspect that Johnny Mercer is probably in the hands of the whips as we speak, which is probably why he's gone
What's
to ground.
been done to him, do you think, of this?
Well, I hope nothing too awful. I think that Johnny was elected when wasn't it, 2015? No, was it 2015?
It might have been 2015.
And I think that there's a process that happens to people who become elected as MPs, which is they go in, they get elected, they think they're going to complete, everything's going to change, they're going to change the world, and then they go through, they get to this stage where they realise that it's not as easy as it looks, and it's all very complicated, and there is a sort of sense of disillusionment, and I think he's just been caught at the moment where he's perhaps feeling that. And I think, you know, it's normal to when you're quite a new MP and you're still getting used to the fact that, you know, yes, you've been elected to make a difference, but making the difference is really difficult. But is it particularly difficult in this situation? With where the government is? Well, I mean, this is the period in British politics is definitely a very difficult one. I mean, I don't know whether it's any more or less. I mean, I guess that depends on what side you're on and what you think. But he's obviously, you know, having some moments of doubt and pain, and I think that's quite normal. But Maya, do you think MPs should show a little bit more loyalty to their parties?
No, I mean, I think particularly at this moment where we have a government that is in somewhat disarray, it's been complete chaos around Brexit, but we also have a domestic agenda that is almost non-existent. So whether you look at stuff like homelessness, rising household debt, if you look at issues like climate change, that the Labour Party actually does have some policies on, we're hearing almost nothing from the government. And I actually think it's not a time where I would agree with the Tory MP that the government looks a mess, but I would also question what party he thought he was joining. This is a party of austerity. It's the party that has seen a rising use of food banks. So I think I agree with him to a degree about the mess of the Conservatives, but also what were your values going into this? What were you expecting?
And would you defend Labour MPs that decide to do the same? Let's have a look at Frank Field, for example.
I mean, I think that MPs can be at odds with their leaders. I think that is going to happen. It doesn't necessarily mean I always agree with why they are.
OK.
So.
I mean, Bernard, Johnny no longer feels comfortable with the ethos and values of the Conservative Party. He doesn't seem to share them. Should he resign?
No. I think he should be doing what he's doing, starting a positive conversation about what ethos and values we want to take out of the present situation into the future. I share Maya's concern that a great deal is being neglected because of the difficulty the government is having with Brexit. That's partly because a large number of MPs don't seem to want to accept the referendum result, which they all said they would accept. That's one of the reasons it's... But this is a kind of existential political crisis. I mean, the Brexit result came as such a shock to so many people, and they're so reluctant to accept it. You know, this is just something we have to get through.
Is he in the right party? Is he in the right party?
Oh, yeah, he's in the right party. He's a good guy, and I very much hope he'll continue as an MP. Also, he does represent something rather refreshing, is that, you know, I was brought up to button your lip and be very careful what you say and be very measured and grown up.
You haven't always practised that, have you?
Well, there's a kind of authenticity that the public is demanding from politicians, and boy, that's it. It's not quite what we want to hear at this particular moment in the Conservative Party, but, you know, I think that kind of freshness is invigorating for politics as a whole.
See, this is what I think is needed. But people, like, as a non-politician, people look at our members of parliament, and the MP's job is to protect the nation, first and foremost. Then their obligation is to the constituents that they represent, and thirdly, to their political parties. And they're
Correct.
making everything about politics. And it's a Conservative Party versus the Labour Party.
It was a Conservative politician that first said that, of course.
Yeah, but it's true. It's in the rules.
Winston Churchill.
As I understand it, it's in your job description.
Serve the nation first, yes.
And the government are not doing that today. You
The
know?
government, of course,
I
keeps
don't
saying
think
it's
the
serving...
government are not.
What's that?
Members of
Are they not
Parliament
serving
are
the
not.
national
No,
interest?
I think
they're
the Prime Minister is absolutely doing her best to serve the national interest. I don't necessarily agree
By
with
progressing
some of her
something
judgments.
that's going to be a complete catastrophe.
So you don't believe in democracy. You want to overturn the referendum result.
Well, didn't we have a 5-year parliamentary election? We elected a 5-year parliament in 2015. Then 2 years later, after Theresa May said 6-7 times, we're definitely not having another general election until 2020, she had one 2 years later.
We're going to come on, and we're going to come to all
the
of this.
vast majority of MPs were elected on a Brexit ticket. That was in the Labour manifesto as well as the Conservative
And we'll
manifesto.
return to it, because while we're discussing Johnny Mercer, just take a look at this.
I'm certainly looking forward to testing myself against the hunters. I hope they give it everything, and I certainly will. What are you looking forward to?
Spending 24/7 with you.
It's a really important bill going through. Obviously, I'm on the run, so therefore I've got to somehow get myself up to London, vote, then get out of there and hook up with Kay again later. I've got a lot of concerns about getting back into London. There's a lot of ANPR, cameras, and it's slightly risky. If I was to get caught on day 2, it would be a personal humiliation.
There speaks the former military man. Well, that was Johnny Mercer on the Channel 4 show Hunted. He is trying to avoid detection or being surveyed with the Sky presenter Kay Burley. He said he was making his way to London to the Commons. In fact, they did catch up with him there and put surveillance around the House of Commons. What did you think of it?
It's quite funny. I don't know what he was doing on that programme for a start.
Yes, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit embarrassing for an MP to be doing this kind of thing, to be honest. He's not a celebrity. That's what it's called, celebrity hunted, right? I think it's a bit embarrassing.
Right, or light relief.
Well, I think actually quite a lot of my colleagues are sort of sneakingly jealous that he's getting all the publicity.
Getting to sit next to Kate Burnley.
And it's not
Or
about
maybe
Brexit.
that. Well, look, we were talking about Brexit just a few moments ago, so let's return to that theme. Our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, we've hunted him down, and he's here. Welcome back to the programme. So we are talking about the febrile nature, as Johnny Mercer sees it, in the Tory party. Is it as febrile as it seems?
Yes, I mean, I don't know how many other MPs would use the exact language of Johnny Mercer, but I think quite a few of them would share the broad sentiment. The Prime Minister leaving Brussels today in her bag a set of politically impossible options. And she's arriving, very shortly, back in this country to rejoin a party where a large part of the cabinet, a large part of the parliamentary party, whether they are Remainers, whether they are hardline Brexiteers, whether they are and see themselves as pragmatists, are simply not in the business of buying what's on offer. The business in Brussels is about, is it possible to construct some sort of intricately constructed piece of fudge on several fronts, whether it is to do with the divorce deal or the future relationship. But Parliament now, at least, is not in the fudge-buying business. And Brussels isn't very interested in cooking it up.
Well, let's have a listen to the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, and what he has to say about the state of the negotiations.
Well, there is a particular situation in which you are just a matter of months, not years, but months away from being able to implement an agreement when it might potentially be helpful to have an option of an extension. But that doesn't resolve the substantive issue of principle where we still disagree with the EU, which is Theresa May has said we will not agree to anything that involves the carve-up of the United Kingdom, having customs borders within our sovereign territory, and nor will we agree to indefinite membership of the customs union.
John, what's he talking about?
That's a good question.
Does he know?
I think you've got to look at the words that are being used reasonably carefully. There is at the moment no policy of extending the implementation period. What there is an idea for an option of possibly extending the implementation period, an option which the Prime Minister is at pains to tell us will never be needed and will never actually happen. And what do you take from that? You take Brussels offering this possible idea. I think in their eyes, they're trying to be helpful. But anything that moves towards Brussels looks like a compromise, an accommodation of Brussels' point of view back at Westminster, and not just among hardline Brexiteers, is a compromise too far. So Theresa May is exactly in this hard place, walled in by the politics of Westminster and the Conservative Party too.
Is it a compromise too far, extending the implementation transition period?
Well, we don't know what the deal's going to be until we actually see the deal, and I keep saying that to my colleagues.
But would it be a compromise too far?
The point you've got here, you've got a very distrustful atmosphere because ever since John started interviewing me when I came into Parliament 26 years ago, the history of the European issue is littered with assurances given by governments which have turned out to be untrue. And things that would not happen if we sign this or sign that then happen. And therefore, people are... You start talking about extending the implementation period, well, you're opening a can of worms. You're going into the new, what they call the financial perspective. And the European Union is saying, well, you'll have to carry on paying, you won't have a rebate, and then they might be able to pile in a whole lot of extra liabilities into the exit bill, which really, frankly, won't be worth paying for. Another 10 billion quid, another 15 billion quid. It won't be worth paying for that.
I mean, I think what's happening here is we're bumping up against a very clear reality that was not discussed during the referendum campaign. The issue of the Irish border, the issue of the fact that the EU's economy is 7 times the size of ours, so they, of course, have more power than us in these negotiations. But also, I think this is something the New Statesman's Stephen Bush has pointed out repeatedly, that the average trade deal takes 28 months to be negotiated. This period is 21 months. So, I mean, the idea that you would somehow cobble together a trade deal in these very, very unique circumstances where you're trying to actually have some distance from a trading partner, not get closer to it, is absolute fantasy land. I think that we need some reality in this, and the Conservatives have actually just been feeding us a ton of lies, and it's been entirely chaotic. People's lives, people's livelihoods are on the line here, and that is what we should be talking about.
How do you see it, Sarah?
I think that we are focusing too much on our side of it. I think the EU's intransigence has been extraordinary. They are treating us as though they are treating the British people who did vote to leave as though we were sort of criminals. and it's appalling. And as a result, it is, you know, they have an impossible task. Theresa May faces incredible obstacles and difficulties. You know, we've got.
But is that the EU's fault?
I mean, sorry. Was it, you know, imitating her dancing? That's helpful, is it? I mean, the sort of stuff that we're seeing from them.
We
there's
can
no
play
respect.
silly games and talk about the little things.
There's no respect. They think that the most important thing for the EU is to make sure that this is a failure for Britain. Because if we get this right,
but there's
and
no
if we
way it
are
could be a success, Sarah.
You
There's
say
no
that
way.
because you have your view. But of course, there is a way that it can be a success. But it has to be. Everyone has to work together, and they simply don't want that, because the problem is we have a EU where, you know, Italy wants to leave. Lots of, I mean, they're just worried. They're worried about letting go of their power, which is, you know, which is what drives them, and they are completely, you know, determined.
Well,
and that's what we face.
Wind this back again, because there's a lot of talk about the transition period being sort of 18 months or being extended by another year, but we're not even close to getting there yet. First, we have to get a withdrawal agreement. And the withdrawal agreement is in two parts. The first part is the legal technical separation of the United Kingdom from the European Union. That consists of three major things: the protection of citizens' rights, EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the European Union. Secondly, the financial settlement of our financial obligations, which are currently down to about £39 billion. The dates we're going to pay it, what's the payment plan, what years we're going to pay, how much are we going to pay when. And the third thing is finding a solution to make sure there's permanently never a border, a legal piece of text that says we will never put a border back on the island of Ireland. We have to do those three things first before we can even get to the second piece, which is just a political declaration about we might have some kind of future trade deal, Canada plus, Norway, it might be EEA membership, or it might be a UK special relationship, and it probably will be, but not for 8 to 10 years.
All right, we've introduced you, Jason, but our viewers probably don't know exactly who you are. So let's show them a little bit from one of your podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to our first broadcast of Three Blokes in a Pub. I guess that's what we're going to call ourselves.
Drinking beer.
Drinking beer, obviously.
Hi, my name's Jason Hunter. I spent over a decade living and working in over a dozen different countries, inside and outside the European Union. I've negotiated billions of dollars of trade internationally, both within and without of the EU.
But just pick up, Jason, on what Sarah was saying. What about the intransigence of the EU and the way they have treated Theresa May? Does that not need some critical scrutiny?
Well, the EU is a rules-based organisation. The same as the World Trade Organisation is a rules-based organisation. Now, we know this because we helped write the rules over the last 40-odd years as members. So the European Union are bound by the Treaty of the European Union. They're bound by the Treaty for the Functioning of the European Union. They're also bound by other international treaties with another 60 countries around the world where they have other international trade agreements.
About their
Can I just contest the basis of this? The EU obeys its own rules when it suits them. They didn't obey their own rules when the Eurozone was...
The EU,
just a minute. Just a minute. I didn't interrupt you. They didn't obey their own rules when the Eurozone started collapsing, and they broke their no bailout rule. They started bailing out the economies that needed propping up. We told them the euro would be a disaster. We told them they would finish up bailing out. They assured us there would be no bailout. And that turned out to be a lie.
And yet the euro...
And do you know what? The European Court of Justice...
the British pound at the moment.
The European
and you're saying that
the European Court of... The Eurozone will collapse. There is absolutely no question about it.
Another fantasy.
No, well, OK.
I mean, it might be your fantasy that the euro collapses, but it's a stronger currency than the British pound,
As we speak, the Italian banks are going through another liquidity crisis. And if they have... all the money in Germany would not be enough to bail out the Italian economy if they have a complete collapse.
Lucky they've got 27 other friends and neighbours who will help them out.
Oh, yes.
They won't have to go begging to the International Monetary Fund or to Vladimir Putin.
Thank God we're leaving, otherwise the bill will be landing on our doorstep.
Well, that's categorically not true either, because David Cameron
You said 27 other members.
David Cameron came back and he got a categorical piece of legislation that said we will not have to take part in any...
Is that like the no bailout clause that was in the Maastricht Treaty?
Can Britain get a good deal at this stage? I mean, is Theresa May right?
With whom?
Well,
we need a deal with the rest of the world because we're losing trade deals with 87 other countries.
Most countries trade with or without trade deals. Most trade happens without trade deals. Our biggest trading partner is the United States. we don't have a trade agreement with the United States.
See, that, you don't know what you're talking about, Bernard. I'm sorry, I'm not having this.
Let Jason respond.
The European Union have dozens upon dozens upon dozens of cooperation agreements with the United States. The USA is our second biggest export market. They take 25% of everything we sell around the world.
So what you're saying, that trade's going to stop as soon as we leave the European Union with the United States? Is that what you're saying?
No, what happens is, with all of the countries, not just the United States, when we sell a widget today from out of the UK to 87 countries around the world for £1, we'll be treated as a third country under WTO rules.
And, right? What does that mean for our trade, then?
What that means
you mean
is all of our
United States will stop buying our widgets?
No, it means all of our customer companies all around the world, whether it's South Korea, United States,
You won't
Canada,
actually say
Mexico.
what you're implying. Of course, trade will continue.
They will have to apply import
And we
tariffs.
just had Singapore on the radio this morning saying that they're doing a trade deal with the EU and they will novate their agreement to the United Kingdom when we leave.
All right, let me just open this up here. How likely do you think no deal is at this point? And are you worried about it?
I think it's unlikely. I think that they will bend over backwards to get something.
Right. And do you think people like Bernard Jenkin in the party should be in more compromising mode?
No, they can say what they think. It's up to them.
I mean, I do think that there is this. Some people seem to be living in this fantasy land where there's big talk and there's a lot of platitudes that we hear, aggressive platitudes, not only from the EU. We've also seen Theresa May making these big speeches about red lines that she then actually has to step away from. Actually, I think part of the problem is that the Conservatives have not been honest about the realities of these negotiations. At least with the Labour Party, what we have is them talking about the necessity of a customs union. And now we're seeing that actually that is the reality.
Manifesto.
I mean, but I think the point...
That wasn't in your manifesto.
But I think the point
I mean, if you want to talk about
that
opportunism, I think Jeremy Corbyn is pretty much top of the list.
I think that what is happening with Labour, I think what's actually happening with Labour is they've recognised where the country is. They've recognised the reality of the referendum.
And they're pursuing it.
And they have had
if
their
he really wanted to get a good deal for the country, he would be helping the Prime Minister, not going up against her and making her life even harder.
Can we stop making this party political? This is a national issue. This affects millions upon millions of households in the United Kingdom. When we were in Geneva, they said other countries around the world are back and forth to that same building we were in, and they are looking at the United Kingdom economy, saying which pieces can we take out of it. They said under every single model that they've run, with a withdrawal agreement, without a withdrawal agreement, with a transition, without, the agri-food sector in the United Kingdom has got 18 months to 2 years before other countries will decimate it. They will flood us with cheap imports.
John.
Real scaremongering.
There is clearly a possibility of the talks in Brussels ending up with no agreement and therefore no deal, although no one in Europe wants that to be the outcome, although a number of countries on the continent of Europe would see it as a dreadful outcome. Some of the lowland countries, Belgium and others, would suffer materially and seriously as a result of that. But it could yet happen. No one's even prepared for it. It's not quite that simple, as if that were simple. Were that to be the outcome, the thing then comes to Parliament, and there's no majority in Parliament for such an outcome. And although there may be no obvious mechanism for Parliament to give it the thumbs down and say you can't do this, Parliament will find a way when there is a will. So, we're heading into a fog, a deep fog, in which any outcome, however destructive, is still possible.
Right. I mean, Maya, on Jeremy Corbyn, do you think the Labour Party should be clear about its support for a people's vote?
I mean, I think that they're playing it as they have to, right? That these situations are all developing, and I think what they said at the party conference is we are going to observe what happens with these negotiations. It does depend on what happens with this deal, and I think the reason I make it party political is because it is the Conservatives who are in charge of these negotiations, and they are going catastrophically.
They are.
You're going obviously on the march. That is tomorrow, in fact, isn't it? The People's Vote March for a second referendum. What do you think of Maya's response in terms of Labour's position? Do you think they should be clearer?
I try and stay away from politics, but...
Best of luck with that.
You're in politics. Don't pretend that you're not...
Labour are playing a very genius...
Isn't a referendum a people's vote? I mean, what else is it? A goat's vote? I mean, who's voting if not people?
The Labour Party are playing a very
ridiculous
clever political game, and it's strategy-wise, it looks great from the outside in business, because they're trying to be all things to all people. You can listen to...
But that's what opposition do.
Yeah, you can listen to... Len McCluskey, he'll tell you one thing. Jeremy Corbyn will tell you something else. Keir Starmer will tell you something else. John McDonnell will tell you a fourth different thing. So you can sit at home being a Labour Leave, a Labour Remain voter, and you can all think that the Labour's the party for you. And they're not either. They're just not putting their money where their mouth is.
In all this rather febrile discussion, we tend to lose sight of the fact that Parliament handed the decision to the British people. The British people took a decision. And now the European Union is trying to keep this country prisoner It's trying to hold this country hostage.
That's fear-mongering. That's Project Fear.
It's just a fact. They're trying to make sure. They're trying to make sure that leaving the European Union is as painful as possible.
Well,
if people like you win, it will be a defeat for democracy and a defeat for the British people.
Well, Bernard, take a look at the front page of the Evening Standard. It says Brexiteers need a vote, Remainers need a vote. We all need a vote, a people's vote.
Well, that's a Remain newspaper.
We've had a vote.
That's a Remain,
George Osborne,
Remain sporting. Yes, he was a Remain campaigning chancellor who lost the vote. We had the vote. When we had the vote, nobody said...
Based on lies, wasn't it?
But it is like voting California.
OK, how many lies did the Remain campaign?
OK, well, let me take this point.
Let me how many lies did the Remain campaign
Well, what's Bernard asked first?
How many lies did the Remain campaign make?
What we're talking about is...
What about the recession we're now meant to be in? The 600,000 unemployed we're now meant to have?
I will answer your question. David Cameron is accused of saying there'll be World War III immediately after the referendum. George Osborne is accused of saying we have to have an emergency budget immediately after the referendum. Then Leave have been criminally prosecuted for overspending and breaking electoral law. Leave EU leaders
far less money than the Remain campaign.
Aaron Banks
and they didn't spend 9 million of
sat in a parliamentary select committee and they said they gave evidence that they lied and they misled their voters. So what you're saying is everybody lied. And yet you want to... you call that democracy? You don't believe in democracy. You just believe in Brexit. And that's not good enough.
I believe in democracy. And every general election, there are exaggerations which...
And lies.
It's what happens.
Let him respond.
And the people make up their minds. And the people have made up their minds. And you want to take on the British people. And that would be... if you really want to cause chaos.
I want to interject at this point because in terms of changing minds, Sarah, the Daily Mail has changed its tone, if not its mind, when it comes to some of its leader columns. If we look at this particular piece of commentary, it says, if transition lasts little as a few months more, is that not worth the wait? And after months of similar noises off, Mrs May's enemies risk resembling paper tigers. Have they moved into a better position away from hard Brexit in your mind, or have they betrayed readers?
I think that... this is really about supporting Theresa May. I think this is about supporting the stability of the Conservative Party, because I think one of the whatever you say about how the negotiations have gone or the rights or wrongs of leaving, she's really up against a lot of obstacles, and I think the last thing we need now is for her to go. And I think she just needs to.
So you think the paper's in the right place? I mean, the resembling paper tigers, dare I say it, might be referring to purist Brexiteers like you, Bernard.
Well, actually, I agree with the first statement you read out, that if we have to wait a little longer to get the right deal, I think most of my colleagues would accept that.
So you would accept an extended transition then?
Well, let's wait. That's why I say
let's
wait and see until we've seen the final deal.
But you would be prepared to wait a little bit longer?
If we have to wait a little bit longer to get what is a good deal, I don't think anybody could argue against
you're saying you didn't know what you voted for before because we don't know what the final deal is. I know you get to have another vote on it when you know what it is.
I campaigned and I voted for leave, and the country is leaving the European Union. You seem to be disputing that we can leave.
No,
you think unless the EU gives us permission, we can't leave.
Yes, Sarah said you said your heart sinks.
But the heart does slightly sink at having more Brexit negotiations. I quite like it to end as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a difference between wanting it to be extended and feeling that it needs to be extended.
Just listening to Bernard Jenkin, do you think number 10 will be warmed by the words of Bernard saying, actually, I'm relatively relaxed if it takes a few months more, go ahead and extend that transition period?
That wasn't permission to go ahead and extend the transition.
All right, but you know what I mean. You weren't violently against it.
Look, I think conditions are now such that anything that looks like a shred of encouragement is going to be grabbed, embraced and kissed to death by number 10 Downing Street. They are in need of... So you can look forward to that.
Yes, look forward to
this is a difficult spot. The word from number 10 is that everything is going in the right direction. They're making good progress. The party will be OK in the end. That sounds a great deal more like hope than the reality of where we are at the moment. We don't know. Anyone who tells you they know where we're going is simply giving you a lot of old baloney. We don't know. Who knows? It could conceivably work out. It is also possible that Theresa May will not be there long enough to see it not work out. I detect some mood on the backbench of the Conservative Party, which is a hardening of impatience against Theresa May. People who were previously tolerant and were seeing themselves as pragmatic are talking now about letters going in and all of that sort of thing. The atmospherics are getting much more troublesome.
Well,
but she would win a vote of no confidence.
Well, that's...
It would be a pointless exercise, because if you win a vote of no confidence, then you're there for another year. Is that right?
Well, you cannot be challenged.
You cannot be challenged for another year.
Yeah.
So actually,
on that
is still a
position.
substantial vote against her in a vote of confidence, even were she to win it, would still be seriously damaging.
Yeah, of course.
Now, this is not a dinner party, and more's the pity that there's no food yes, to eat here. But the broadcaster Esther Ranson, speaking on Chopper's Brexit podcast, I should say, made by Telegraph journalist Chris Hope. And here are her rules on Brexit being discussed at the dinner table.
You say you've seen your friends at each other's throats about Brexit. How do you police rows? Do you ban it at the table?
I do.
So when they walk in, you leave your coat, your hat, and your Brexit views at the door.
I fine them. I say, anyone who mentions the B word, you have to pay for the drinks.
Well, I'm not going to do that today, but it might come to that. Maya, is that a good idea, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are really sick of these kind of ongoing negotiations and particularly the discourse around it. Like, the kind of arguments we've seen here, it's understandable, but I think people are really tiring of it. What they want to hear
We're all tired of it.
But what they want to hear is how their livelihoods are going to be protected, which is not, it does not seem to be part of the Tory plan at all right now. And I think people are concerned about their day-to-day, and the domestic agenda, as I mentioned, is non-existent.
Right, well, that concludes our discussion on Brexit for now. John, thanks very much. Let's